The morning the temperature fell past 45 below zero, when car batteries froze solid and diesel fuel turned to sludge in gas station pumps across Carver County, Kansas. 37 people stood huddled on frozen ground outside Beth Craine's property, staring at the only structure in the entire township still releasing heat into the killing cold. A narrow concrete shaft descending 12 feet beneath her backyard, its entrance barely visible above packed snow, steam rising faintly from ventilation pipes that hadn't frozen shut like every other system for 20 miles. Most of them had laughed 6 months earlier when Beth started digging. It began in late spring, when the ground thawed enough to break through clay hardpan without destroying equipment. Beth hired a local excavation crew to dig a shaft on the northeast corner of her property, 12 feet straight down, wider at the bottom than the top, reinforced with poured concrete walls thick enough to support a truck. The crew thought she wanted a storm shelter. She corrected them once. "It's thermal storage," she said. They looked at each other and kept digging. By early summer, the hole was finished. A concrete cylinder sunk deep into earth that stayed 55 degrees year-round no matter what happened on the surface. Beth installed a steel hatch at ground level, a reinforced ladder bolted to the interior wall, and began the work nobody understood. She lined the bottom with gravel for drainage, built wooden platforms to keep supplies off the floor, installed battery-powered LED strips along the walls, ran PVC ventilation pipes up through the soil, angled to prevent wind from pushing cold air downward. Then she started hauling things underground. Canned food, water barrels, blankets, a small propane heater with a carbon monoxide detector, medical supplies, batteries, a hand crank radio, buckets with tight sealing lids, folding cots, wool coats, sleeping bags rated to 20 below. And that was when the talk started. At the feed store, men leaning against pickup trucks watched her load 50-pound sacks of rice into her truck bed. "She's building a bunker," one of them said, grinning. Another laughed. "For what? Russian invasion?" The first man shook his head. "Nah, she's one of those doomsday types. Thinks the world's ending." At the grocery store, women murmured near the checkout line as Beth rolled past with a cart stacked with canned vegetables. "I heard she's got a whole underground room now," someone whispered. "Must have cost a fortune." Another voice replied, "Money she could have spent fixing that roof. You see how the shingles are curling?" Beth heard it all. She always did in a town this small. She didn't respond. She just kept working. Her brother, Danny, stopped by one afternoon in July, found her organizing shelves underground, and stood at the top of the ladder staring down. "Beth, what are you doing?" She looked up from a crate of canned soup. "Preparing." "For what?" "For when systems fail." Danny climbed halfway down, his face creased with concern. "You know how this looks, right? People think you've gone off the deep end." Beth stacked another can carefully. "People think a lot of things. I'm serious. They're calling you paranoid." She met his eyes. "You remember the ice storm in '09? Danny frowned. "Yeah, power was out 3 days. "For days," Beth corrected. "And we were lucky. It was March. 40 degrees outside. Imagine if that happened in January. Imagine if it lasted 2 weeks instead of 4 days. It won't. You don't know that." Danny sighed. "The grid's better now. We've got backup systems. Emergency services." Beth turned back to her shelves. "And if those fail?" He didn't answer. He climbed back up, told her to call if she needed anything, and drove away. She listened to his truck fade into the distance, then went back to work. By late autumn, the cellar was fully stocked. 12 feet below ground, surrounded by earth that held steady at 55 degrees, she had built something no one else in Carver County believed she'd ever need. A space that didn't rely on electricity, didn't depend on fuel deliveries, didn't require any system that could fail when the temperature dropped. She tested everything twice. The ventilation pulled fresh air without letting cold sink in. The propane heater warmed the space evenly. The hatch sealed tight. She could live down there for weeks if necessary. Then November came, and the forecast started changing. A polar vortex was shifting south. Meteorologists used words like unprecedented and dangerous. The National Weather Service issued warnings. But people in Carver County had heard warnings before. They stocked up on firewood, checked their furnaces, and went about their routines. Beth checked her cellar one last time, sealed the hatch, and waited. 3 days later, the cold arrived. Not gradually, but like a door slamming shut. And within hours, Everything people thought they could depend on started breaking down. The first night, the cold felt manageable. Furnaces ran constantly, but they ran. People layered blankets, kept fires going, told themselves it would pass. By the second night, the temperature had dropped to 30 below, and the county's infrastructure began to fracture. Transformers exploded in blue flashes across the township. Power lines snapped under the weight of ice. The grid failed in sections, then entirely, leaving homes dark and heating systems dead. Beth's neighbor, Paul Richter, tried his backup generator at dawn on the third day. It turned over twice, then died. The diesel had gelled. He tried again. Nothing. Across the street, the Morrison family's propane furnace ran for another 6 hours before the tank pressure dropped too low to feed the system. Inside their house, the temperature fell 10 degrees in an hour. Beth stayed underground. 12 feet below the surface, the earth held steady at 55 degrees. The propane heater added another 15, keeping the cellar at 70. She rationed carefully: propane, food, water. She read by LED light. She listened to the hand crank radio as emergency broadcasts grew more desperate. Roads impassable. Fuel trucks stranded. Rescue operations suspended. Residents advised to shelter in place. On the surface, Carver County was dying. Pipes burst inside walls as water froze and expanded. Roofs cracked under the weight of ice. Families burned furniture to stay warm. By the fourth day, Paul Richter's house had dropped to 18 degrees inside. His wife, Linda, wrapped their 2 daughters in every blanket they owned, but the girls' lips were turning blue. Paul stood at his kitchen window, staring across the frozen yard toward Beth's property. He saw the ventilation pipes, saw the faint shimmer of heat rising from them, saw proof that something over there still worked. He pulled on every coat he owned and forced the door open against the snow. The walk across the yard felt like drowning. The air burned his lungs. Ice coated his beard within seconds. He reached Beth's property, found the hatch, and pounded on the steel with numb fists. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the hatch cracked open. Warm air poured out. Beth's face appeared, calm and unsurprised. Paul. He couldn't speak. His jaw was too cold. She stepped back. Get inside. He dropped through the hatch onto the ladder and climbed down into warmth so sudden and complete it felt like a hallucination. His legs buckled. Beth caught his arm and guided him to a cot. Linda, he managed. The girls. How cold is your house? 18 degrees. Maybe less now. Beth didn't hesitate. She pulled on insulated boots, a heavy coat, wrapped a scarf across her face. Show me. They crossed the frozen yard together, Paul stumbling, Beth steady. Inside the Richter house, Linda was crying, holding her daughters, all 3 of them shaking violently. Beth assessed the situation in seconds. Pack what you need. We're leaving. Linda stared at her. Leaving? You can't stay here. You'll freeze. Where? My place. Underground. Move. 10 minutes later, all 4 of them climbed down into the cellar. The girls stopped shaking within minutes. Linda wept with relief. Paul sat on the floor, staring at the walls lined with supplies, the propane heater glowing steadily, the thermometer reading 72 degrees. I'm sorry, he whispered. Beth handed him a wool blanket. For what? For laughing. For thinking you were crazy. She knelt beside the heater, adjusting the flame. You weren't wrong to think it. You were wrong to assume it wouldn't matter. By the next morning, word had spread the only way it could, through desperate movement across frozen ground. The Morrisons came first, then Danny with his wife and son, then the Schultz family from 2 streets over. Each time, Beth opened the hatch without hesitation. The cellar wasn't built for this many people, but she made it work. Rationed food carefully, organized sleeping shifts, kept the heater running low and steady. The earth around them held the warmth. 12 feet of insulation that couldn't fail because it wasn't a system, it was geology. Above ground, the temperature dropped to 45 below. Car batteries froze solid. Diesel turned to gel. Houses became tombs. Below ground, 37 people survived in a space no one had believed mattered, until it was the only thing that did. On the 6th day, the cold finally broke. Not suddenly, but in degrees, 40 below, then 35, then 30. Still deadly, but no longer apocalyptic. National Guard trucks pushed through drifts on the main roads. Emergency crews reached Carver County by late afternoon, moving house to house, finding families huddled in near-freezing rooms, burning furniture, suffering frostbite and hypothermia. When they reached Beth Craine Street, they expected the worst. Instead, they found 37 people emerging from a concrete shaft in her backyard, warm and healthy, blinking in the pale winter light, like miners returning from underground. The crew chief stared at the cellar entrance, then at Beth. "How many days were you down there?" "6. All of you?" "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, you just saved more lives than we've found alive in the last 4 townships." The story spread fast. Local news arrived within hours, cameras capturing footage of the thermal cellar, the ladder descending into earth, the concrete walls, the shelves of supplies, the propane heaters still glowing. By evening, the story had gone statewide. By the next morning, national outlets picked it up. Beth avoided the cameras. She stayed busy helping families return to their damaged homes, organizing supply distribution, coordinating with relief workers. But Paul Richter didn't avoid them. He stood in front of a news crew outside his frozen house and told the truth. "We mocked her," he said, his voice steady and ashamed. "Every single one of us thought she was paranoid. We joked about her digging that hole. We called her crazy." He paused, looking toward Beth's property. "And when everything failed, when the power died and the cold came in, and we had nowhere left to go, she opened that hatch and let us in anyway." Linda stood beside him, holding their daughters. She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't hesitate. She just helped. The broadcast aired across Kansas that night. By morning, Beth's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, survival blogs, engineering firms wanting to study her design. She ignored most of it. She had work to do. 3 weeks later, after the county began its slow recovery, Danny stopped by. He found Beth restocking the cellar, rotating supplies, checking ventilation. He climbed down the ladder and stood watching her work. "You're keeping it," he said. "Not a question." "Of course. Even though everyone knows now? Even though people finally believe you?" Beth stacked a case of canned beans on a shelf. "People believing me doesn't change what the earth does. Doesn't change what systems fail. Next time might not be cold. Might be heat. Might be storms. Might be something we haven't seen yet." Danny nodded slowly. "I'm building one." She looked at him, surprised. "At my place," he continued. 10 feet deep. Thermal mass. I've got a crew coming next month." He paused. "I should have listened the first time." Beth smiled faintly. "You're listening now. That's what matters." By summer, 7 families in Carver County had started digging. The local hardware store began stocking thermal cellar supplies. A contractor offered workshops on underground construction. The shift wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, practical, rooted in the memory of 6 days when the only warm place for 20 miles was 12 feet below ground in Beth Craine's backyard. One evening in late June, Beth stood at the edge of her property, watching the sun set over fields turning green again. The cellar hatch sat closed behind her, barely visible above the grass. No steam rising now. No emergency. Just earth, holding steady at 55 degrees, waiting. Paul's younger daughter, Emma, rode her bike past, then stopped, looking at the hatch. "Miss Beth." "Yes. My dad's building one like yours. I heard. He says we'll never have to be that scared again." Beth smiled. "That's the idea." Emma pedaled away. Beth stood a moment longer, then turned back toward her house. The cellar would need checking next week. Supplies rotated, batteries tested. Ventilation cleared. The work never really ended. But that was fine. Because preparation wasn't paranoia. It was memory. And memory, properly stored, could keep you alive when everything else failed.